Hi everyone, how are you? I am Steve Lecture and I am your host for for to, tonight's live about inspiration for pre-launch chat. Don't hesitate to ask me any question. I'll be chatting about the mission, the technical points, what are the important things to remember about it, and what to expect from the launch in a few hours. That's really interesting to have a mission like that because it is spreading awareness about space among many people far further from the usual circle that we have usually. And I like that. I like having many people interested in space. That's really nice when people talk about space around you when when there is something new to say about it. And it was the same. It's always interesting when there are people involved because when there are people involved, the general public is much more interested in it. And we've seen that with the first tourist launches before the summer with New Glenn, excuse me, Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket, and of course the capsule that went to space with Bezos, and also Virgin Galactic's spaceplane, Spaceship 2 that went to space also, and people are really interesting. But that's not, although it's the same thing because it's space tourism in both cases. It's not the same here because of course they are going to orbit and not just reaching the edge of space. So we can maybe start here. What is space? Space is usually defined by the Kármán line. Kármán line is, if you say it shortly, it's 100 kilometers beyond. If you are lower than 100 kilometers, you are considered in the atmosphere, and if you are higher, you are considered in space. But in fact, there's more to that. It's more complicated than that because the Kármán line was defined by the speed you need to have if you want to sustain flight. Of course, when you are low on a low altitude, your plane can fly really slow, and when you go further up, there's less and less air, and your plane needs to go farther, faster and faster when it goes higher. And at some point, you will go so fast that your speed will exceed the orbital velocity. The orbital velocity is the speed your spaceship would have if it orbited the Earth. And it's the opposite. When you orbit close to the Earth, your speed is very high. And as you go higher, your orbital speed is reducing, it's becoming smaller and smaller. So at some point, the two line crosses because one is getting smaller and the other is getting higher. So at some point, the speed you need to have to sustain flight is the same than the speed you will have when orbiting the Earth at a given altitude, and that altitude is 100 kilometers. And of course, if you understand that, you understand that it doesn't make sense for a suborbital flight. So the quarrel between Jeff Bezos and with Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, between Bezos and Branson, that doesn't make any sense because it doesn't matter if you are higher or lower than 100 kilometers on the Kármán line if you are just running in a suborbital flight, because you do not reach that speed that defines the Kármán line. So today, in a few hours, the inspiration for a crew will fly and orbit the Earth, and in that sense, it's the first. It is the real first all civilian crew to reach space and orbit the Earth above the Kármán line, because the Bezos and his crew were, of course, all civilians, but they were not orbiting, and therefore their speed was too slow to be really above the Kármán line in the true sense of the term. So what does it mean? There has been space tourists before. The first one was Dennis Tito, the billionaire, US billionaire that flew on board the Soyuz spacecraft towards. He wanted to fly towards Mir, the Mir space station, but he couldn't because the Mir space station was being decommissioned and had to wait a little. And he finally flew towards the ISS. He was the first real space tourist. And there has been a few more space tourists along the years, always with the Soyuz, and we were flying with the Russians towards the ISS. But there were always only one tourist for a crew or for a spaceship that has the Soyuz has three seats and only has one tourist at a time. Here we have 4 seats on the Crew Dragon, and we have 4 seats, and all 4 seats are civilians. None of them are astronauts. Of course, there are 2 of them that are familiar with space, but they have regular jobs and do not know how to fly a spacecraft. They had been trained to fly on the Crew Dragon, but the training was mostly centered around the emergency procedures, which means if anything goes wrong, they know what to do, but they are not here to fly the spacecraft in itself. It will fly on itself with automation, and of course with the ground crew, SpaceX ground crew, that will fly the spacecraft. But to be honest, there's not much to be done. The launch in itself would be handled by the rocket, the Falcon 9 launcher, and once it's in first low Earth orbit, it will have one maneuver to go higher to reach its intended orbit, and at the end of the 3-day trip, it will also have one other maneuver to get down and re-enter. So for the most part, there will be nothing to do on the spacecraft, apart from, of course, orienting it to have the window facing the Earth. So when will the mission launch? There's a launch window that is available. It will launch today, September 15th in the US, or September 16th in the UTC at midnight. And 2 minutes, the launch window starts 3 minutes after midnight, and the spacecraft is not sure to be launched at the start of the launch window, of course. There can be a lot of things that delay the launch, but usually with SpaceX the launches happen on time. What can be delaying the launch? There are mostly 2 things. One would be a technical problem on the rocket. It can happen, and it has happened before, but the other problem would be a problem with the environment. It would be a problem with the weather, too strong winds, or people, boats or planes in the area that has been marked for that has to be cleared in case of an emergency. And if anyone is flying or sailing in this area, the launch cannot happen. But it's much easier to the launch window is much wider than for the launch towards the ISS, because of course for the ISS, if the spacecraft doesn't launch right on time, then the rendezvous cannot happen with the space station. Here, since there's no rendezvous happening, the launch can happen at any moment. But there are problems with a delay. If a delay happens, there is a recycle time. The Falcon 9 rocket is filled with liquid oxygen and kerosene, RP1, just before launch to have supercooled liquid oxygen. And that causes a problem because there cannot be any hold. There can be a few holds for a few seconds, but any longer hold would imply to shut down, to empty the tanks and recycle the rocket for a launch at a later date. But it would imply to wait for 10, 20, probably 30 minutes at least to give time for the rocket to be recycled. But then it would launch probably most likely around an hour after a scrub, but it could launch later in the day. And that is really important because in case of a launch towards the International Space Station, any scrub means the launch has to happen the next day. So nothing like that today. We can safely assume the launch will happen. Because, of course, SpaceX is launching many rockets. The Falcon 9 is a very reliable rocket, and launches happen all the time. And usually they happen on time, and there's no reason to believe that the launch would not happen on time. So what will happen with the launch? Of course, the regular countdown will happen, and the launch will be exactly the same as with a launch towards the space station, where with a crewed launch or a cargo launch towards the space station. So the rocket will launch towards the north on a 51.6 degree inclination orbit, and will follow the east coast and reach orbit approximately around Ireland. And once it's above Ireland, the spacecraft, the Crew Dragon, will detach from the second stage and the mission will begin. So why launch on this orbit, the same inclination as the International Space Station? Because as I said, there will not be any rendezvous with the space station. It's just because the emergency procedures are in place, are really well thought of for the International Space Station, and they know if there is an abort at any moment of the flight, where to pick up the capsule, and what ship has to be sent toward the capsule, what zones are reserved for any ship. Everything is laid down on the procedure, everything is clear, and therefore it was easier to choose the same inclination orbit because it means the same launch profile. It's exactly the same launch profile. So the launch will send the Crew Dragon or capsule towards space on an orbit in a low Earth orbit. Why launch toward a why launch toward low Earth orbit? It's just because of performance issues. It's not really an issue, but it's easier for the rocket to launch the spacecraft towards a low Earth orbit at 250 kilometers approximately, because the lower you launch, the easier it is for the rocket. On this particular launch, there's no performance problem, but to reach the ISS, the Crew Dragon spacecraft is often filled, the trunk is filled with special parts that weigh a lot, such as the latest solar panels that were on board the Crew 2 mission. And for that, they launch toward a low Earth orbit, very low, 250 kilometers orbit, to first in that case, the rocket can easily put the capsule in orbit. And after that, the capsule in itself will use its thrusters to reach the higher orbit, or the space station in that case. The thrusters, they are on the front. There is a dome on top of the capsule that will open right after the separation, because it's really critical. If the dome cannot open, the thrusters will be enclosed and will not be able to be used, and therefore the capsule will, the mission will be on abort towards orbit. And that case is also covered by the really low orbit, the low parking orbit, because at that altitude, if anything like that would happen, if the thrusters cannot fire because the aerodynamic dome cannot open, or if any other problem happens, the capsule will naturally decay, the orbit will decay, and the capsule will naturally fall back down to Earth in a few days. So this covers the launching towards a low orbit, covers that emergency procedure too. So these thrusters are in front, because at the back there is the trunk, and the trunk is empty for that for the Inspiration 4 mission, and the motors being at the front, the capsule has to make a 180 turn and fly backwards when the engines will be fired. And the passengers, the crew, will not sense a really strong acceleration. There will be negative G's, but really not strong at all, barely noticeable. So the capsule will slowly accelerate and raise its apogee. So when you accelerate from the circular orbit, you create an apogee, a point where that is farther away from the Earth, and this point will be at 590, or I read also 570 kilometers. Anyway, that's quite higher than the 250 kilometers parking orbit, and this will be an ellipsis that will be going from 250 to 590 kilometers, and on that point, this high point, the thrusters will be fired again to circularize again the orbit, make a real circle at that altitude. The interesting point being why go higher? It's just the same as when you're hiking. When you go higher, you have a higher vantage point, and you can see much farther away. A huge chunk of the Earth will be available for your eyes. The suborbital capsules like New Shepard or Spaceship 2 that reach around 100 kilometers can more or less see in 1/4 of the USA from 100 kilometers in altitude. At 590 kilometers altitude, you can see the whole USA without any problem, and also north and south towards Canada, the half of Canada, and south of Mexico too. So you will see almost the whole North America, and of course you could see Europe or Asia as well. You could see a huge chunk of continent by being very high in the sky. The International Space Station is only at 420 kilometers or so. It varies a little during from time to time, but more or less it's the same vantage point as 590 kilometers. The views from the ISS are very much comparable to the views that will that the Inspiration 4 crew will be able to behold. So the inclination being the same as the ISS, they will be able to watch a huge part of the Earth. The inclination is 51.6 degrees, which means on the northern point it will reach that latitude, 51.6 latitude north and 51.6 latitude south. And these points will vary with each orbit and will cover almost all the Earth. And I've made a little calculation, and from that point you could watch, if you were in the capsule, like the Inspiration 4 crew, you could watch towards 70 degrees latitude north and south, because although the capsule would be at 51, you would be able to see toward the poles, almost towards the poles. You will only miss the last 20 degrees of Earth's globe. So they will be able to see almost every populated areas on Earth, and that would be really interesting, because of course they have quite a window on the capsule. Since the capsule do not have to dock with the ISS, they have removed the docking port, and instead they have put a half dome to ensure a beautiful view. The crew could be one at a time. They can be able to put their head in the dome and have a beautiful view of Earth. And no one ever had this view while remaining in a spacecraft. Of course, the people that had EVAs were able to see, to have a very wide field of view, but on the ISS, even in the cupola module, there are only tiny windows, many small windows, but only tiny windows and frame in between, which means, especially with the shutters that are on any window, which means the view is obscured a little. And with this launch, the dome is offering an unobscured view that will be really a new thing in the space industry. And they have a selfie stick outside. They have cameras pointing towards the cupola, the dome, that will take pictures of each person of the crew watching the Earth. So of course the Earth will be really quite small from this point, so they will mostly see the darkness of space around, and but during the night they will be able to see the moon and the stars, and that will be really interesting. And the spacecraft is the same as the Crew 1 mission that sent people, that sent the Crew 1 four NASA astronauts towards the ISS later, before, and it was refurbished and modified. The only modification is the windows instead of the docking port, but it's the same capsule, and it will fly again soon. This is the first time SpaceX will have 3 Dragon capsules flying in orbit at the same time. 3 Dragon capsules at the same time. I don't think the USA ever had 3 spacecraft flying at the same time, 3 crewed spacecraft flying at the same time. Maybe I'm wrong, you don't hesitate to tell me. I just saw your message, Deshanik. If Shenzhou 12 doesn't land before Inspiration 4 starts, there will be 14 people in orbit, and it will be a new record. And of course, that's true. There are 7 people on the ISS. Currently there are 3 people on the Chinese space station, and 4 people from the Inspiration 4, and this is a brand new record. If the Inspiration 4 mission launched in time, and that's really interesting because as well we have another record that I was just talking about, the Crew Dragon capsules. There is one for Crew 2 on the ISS, one cargo also docked on the ISS, and the third one would be this one, the same as for the Crew 1 mission, that will be flying on its own. And it's only the second time a Crew Dragon capsule flies on its own, a free flight mission as they call it, because the first one was the demo flight 1 to prove the demo flight 1 for the uncrewed Dragon, the first one, for the first phase of the COTS missions, and this fly on its own will be really interesting to assess the abilities of the capsule. And the next flight with tourists, with paying customers on board that are not professional astronauts, will be really soon from the Axiom team. There are Axiom Space astronauts that will fly towards the ISS later this year, and it will be they are sent toward the Earth to assess the possibilities of working in space, because Axiom Space want to send modules, private modules, towards the ISS to dock them to the ISS to further expand the capability of the space station. And in the end, they want to be able to undock those modules when the ISS will be sent back down to Earth and live at a separate space station. So the Axiom Space team are really working towards a new space station by sending people towards the ISS. This will be also a mission with a lot of firsts that will be really interesting to follow. But for this Inspiration 4 mission, this is only tourists. They want to raise funds for they want to raise funds as a charity. They want to raise as much as the mission is costing for Jared Isaacman. Jared Isaacman is the one paying for everything. And what does it mean? It means the SpaceX is is asking for $200 million for the flight, for the whole flight. That's approximately the same as the SpaceX asks NASA, but in fact they are asking less for the flight itself, but there are many other things. They have to train the crew, whereas the NASA astronauts are already trained by NASA. They have to use the NASA facilities and rent them. So all in all, for 200, it's not clear, between 200 and 300 million dollars for the flight. That's quite a lot of money, but that's worth it, because if you do the math, the suborbital flights are only costing 1,000 times less, $2,000 for the Blue Origin, and $4,000 $200,000 for Blue Origin and $400,000 for Virgin Galactic, but you only fly for 2 to 3 minutes, whereas you will have a whole 3 days of mission there. And for 200 millions, you have 4 seats, whereas for the suborbital flights, you have to buy seat by seat, of course. So that's really interesting for the future, and in the future there will be many more missions like that, because NASA has a commercial destination program that will allow companies to build space stations, privately owned space stations. They will receive a visit from NASA astronauts from time to time, but most of the time they will be on their own with private astronauts, and they will need a means of transportation. And as of today, the Boeing Starliner is still not operational, and SpaceX is the only one able to send astronauts to any destination. So in the US, of course, because in Russia, the Soyuz is really reliable on that matter. So where was I? For the moment, the weather is go for launch. The Falcon 9 rocket is really sensible towards the conditions, the weather conditions, because the rocket is really thin and long, and therefore any crosswind, which means when it crosses towards the different layers of the atmosphere, it will on one layer the wind would be from north to south, and the next layer, a few thousand meters higher, the wind will be in another direction. So the constraints, the stress on the rocket will make it bend a little, and if it bends on one side and then on another side when it crosses towards another layer, it will be really problematic for the it will be really problematic for the rocket, and the Falcon 9 rocket doesn't handle this kind of stress, this kind of load very well, and therefore there are a lot of scrubs usually because of the weather constraints. But today the weather seems go. So Corey Noonan sent chat Musk aspirational cost per Starship launch is $2 million and can get around to 100 people in orbit. Yes, that's very aspirational for the moment. That's only 20K per person, of course, but that at that moment that needs to be proven for the moment, and that even if it works like that, it will still be the cost for SpaceX, because if they are the only one able to send 100 people to orbit, they will not use they will have a huge margin, as any company, private company would do the same, and they will use that margin to leverage a lot of money, because a lot of money want to go to space, and even if they use a 10-time margin, this will still be very cheap, very cheaper than today, but they will be able to make a lot of money, and Musk loves to reinvest that money in the next thing. So when the Starship will fly, it will be really interesting to see if the money goal, the financial goal are met, and the operational goal of reflying the Starship very quickly. In fact, both goals are the same, because if you fly quickly, you can save a lot of money, and it will be interesting to see if even if for cargo, if the goals are met for this kind of game changer technology, and the price that could come down. That would be really interesting to see, and I don't think there has been such a revolution in the past decades. There were only a few steps forward, and now we are really watching the evolution changing pace. It's really happening now. Starship is really a game changer. Falcon 9 was a first game changer, but Starship is really will be really starting to change the things for the better, and it's only the first one of its kind. Musk is already thinking about the Starship V2, which will be bigger, easier to use. The prototype is one thing. Elon Musk always says that prototyping is one thing, and industrial production is another. And That cannot be. It's really true. Just watch the electric cars, the self-driving cars. In the beginning, Google was having a lot of prototypes. They were working really, really nicely. I remember vividly watching videos of a Prius with a kit, a Google kit on it that was uh, really working really, really great on paper. The car was really working. It was a real thing. And now the only Google cars we have are on a campus. They are not really cars. They are just trolleys, fancy trolleys that that are laughable. Whereas Elon Musk, he really managed to change the first electric cars made by Tesla into really really close to be full self-driving vehicles. And at the same time, he managed to ramp up the production by a lot, by a 100 time factor, 2 orders of magnitude. And Tesla might be overrated in the when you look at the market value, but the Tesla cars are working. The Tesla factories are producing a lot of cars that are sold immediately without any kind of advertisement. So the industrial part of things is really working, and he wants to do the same with Starship, and I can't wait to seeing that happening. So where is the SpaceX stream will start really in 8 minutes also. I will not push this live stream beyond the start of SpaceX's live stream, because they will have lots better cameras. I will only be able to restream the SpaceX stream, and as you can hear, I'm not really fluent. I can speak English, but really can be painful to hear. And also, there is a charity fundraising happening, and I don't want to, even if you are only 3 people right now, I don't want uh, to be interfering with that. That's not how I intend to do live stream in the future. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate, because I will soon stop this live stream. What can I say in the meantime? This fundraising is really interesting. They want to match the price of the mission, but to be honest, it's mainly to be a PR move, if you ask me, because thank you, Corinne Noonan, for the message. If you ask me, it's mostly a PR move, because if he wanted to make a donation, he could have done that without launching to space. So that's a way to inspire people. That's the name of the mission. That's a way to give a meaning to his to this mission. And that's really nice. And don't get me wrong, but that's also a way to have really positive reviews and a huge coverage with the Netflix documentaries. That's always good for business for him, for Jared Isaacman. But that's how it is, and he was not forced to do that, so that's one point for him. So speaking of Netflix documentaries, I encourage all of you to watch it, whether you have Netflix or not. And if you don't have, find a way to watch it. You will not learn many things, but it's really nice to see. It's tearful from time to time, but that's really nice to have a space flight on the platform, on something like Netflix, and on the cover of Time magazine. Everyone is talking about that. I bet it's in the trending topics on Twitter. Yes, yes. I'm reading the message right now. You should watch the message the documentaries on Netflix, and but for the moment you should mostly watch the stream on SpaceX's channel. So that's it for now. I will end that right now. Thank you for hanging out with me. And you should. I made a video today a few hours ago about this Inspiration 4 mission with a few facts. Maybe you will want to have a go at it. But if you're right now watching me live, you probably already know what all there is to know about it. So have a nice evening, have a nice lunch, and Godspeed Inspiration 4.